Hello friends, I am glad to see you again. Today I will tell you about an HOA that wants me to be evicted. I never imagined battling my stepfather over my legally owned house. Yet here I am, writing about my most unsettling experience in a while. Not just petty family drama, because they supported my estranged stepfather. A local homeowners association tried to evict me from my home. Though absurd, the whole ordeal was too real for comfort. My father left me this mountain house years ago. Call it a mountain retreat, nestled in a beautiful wooded area with stunning views, a scenic river nearby, and open skies that made you feel one with nature. I spent many childhood summers there, so it holds some of my fondest memories. I kept this house even though I live and work in a small apartment in the city. When I needed to escape the daily grind, it was my refuge. I kept the exterior clean, paid the taxes, and rented it out for short-term stays for extra money. Despite my stewardship, I never joined the local homeowners association. I never felt obligated to join because my property was borderline outside their jurisdiction. Despite several invitations, I politely declined. My stubbornness and independence eventually annoyed some of their more zealous members. Flash forward 5 years to now. I haven't spoken to my mother or stepfather, Conrad, for reasons I won't go into. The details aren't important to this story, but knowing would explain why I'm so firm. I don't do no contact lightly. We have deep-seated issues and have split. My mother suddenly sent me a brief, impersonal message. She informed me that Conrad had health issues and that they needed my mountain house because it was healthier for him. Less city pollution, more fresh air. My first reaction was sympathy. Medical issues can be serious. She then said it would be selfish to keep a second property to myself when they had none because I already had an apartment. They have a suburban home, but my mountain house was more appealing. I had no idea how to react. Right away, I was confused and angry. I texted back, "I'm sorry you're going through this, but the house is not up for discussion," to avoid a long argument. I assumed it was a random guilt trip or manipulation attempt. However, within weeks, I learned that Conrad had approached the mountain community HOA. He cried about his health, said he and my mother needed the mountain house more than I did, and suggested they pressure me to sign the property over. In normal circumstances, the HOA would have said, "Sorry, that's out of our jurisdiction," or "That's a private family matter." At least they would have been neutral. Instead, they eagerly meddled in my private affairs. Likely because I was the unfriendly resident who never joined them. They might have liked stirring the pot or felt they had a rare chance to push me out. Regardless, they supported Conrad's cause as if it were ethical or legal. It began with hints. When I went up to restock supplies, clean, etc., I found a HOA logo letter pinned to my front door. "We suspect your ownership is in dispute." What dispute? Contact us immediately. I own the title alone, no problem there. After calling the number on the letter, someone quickly said, "Oh yes, there's a matter you need to address. You know, about your mother and stepfather." I realized they had joined Conrad's scheme. No one would say what matter they were talking about, only that I should come in for a meeting or risk further complications. I met with the HOA board in person because this was so strange. I considered it a misunderstanding. Maybe they were duped. A train wreck. The meeting. I sat at a large wooden table with 5 board members, most of whom I had only seen briefly. They immediately called me uncooperative, unneighborly, and unfair for refusing to sign up with the HOA and comply with their community guidelines. They cited my stepfather's urgent health circumstances, insisted that he needed fresh mountain air, and then basically told me that if I didn't hand over or sell at a nominal cost the property to my mother and Conrad, they'd make life difficult. I was stunned. They had no legal grounds to coerce me, but they spoke like a powerful local government force. One board member said, "You know, you're not a valued member of our neighborhood. Your mother respects us, unlike you. She would join. We'd all be in sync if you gave her the house." Another said, "We have ways of enforcing what's in the best interest of the community." I asked, "How exactly? Will you just seize my house?" I was half laughing at the insanity, but they stared at me with smug expressions like they had authority. The situation escalated faster than expected. I explicitly stated that I would not give up my house and that their meddling was inappropriate. I also told them that the property tax statements clearly list me as the owner and that removing me would be illegal. They said they had multiple avenues to ensure the property went to my stepfather if I refused to be a team player. Before the meeting ended, they threatened to evict me if I kept refusing. I remained calm despite my outrage. I left after telling them I'd see them in court if they tried anything, not wanting to waste another minute on nonsense. I thought that would be the end, but they escalated. 2 weeks later, I returned to my mountain house to renovate. I wanted to replace the windows, patch the roof, and possibly paint the living room. The front gate had a new chain when I arrived. Who knows who locked my property gate with a new lock? After cutting the chain with a bolt cutter I keep for odd emergencies, I climbed the driveway. 3 men and 1 woman from the HOA board were on my porch when I got out of my car. They appeared to be waiting. The ringleader said I was in violation of the community code and was no longer allowed on the premises. I asked, "Whose premises?" "My property." "Get off of it." He waved a folder in my face, claiming it was a court document authorizing my removal. He grabbed it and wouldn't let me read it. I realized it wasn't just petty harassment then. They wanted to physically remove me from my home. I told them to leave, but they claimed I was evicted. They said the paperwork was done, so I had to leave. I wouldn't believe them, not smelling right. I would have received county papers if there had been a court order, not been ambushed at my door. I immediately called my lawyer. My attorney was incredulous when I described what was happening. I called the police immediately as instructed. I had a tense standoff on my porch while waiting for the police. The HOA people stood there with their arms folded, telling me I was breaking the law by trespassing, and that someone else needs this home more than you do. We knew who they meant, my stepfather Conrad and my mother. I tried to stay calm despite my anger. I kept saying, "Show me your legal documents." They always refused to let my lawyer see them. The police arrived after 20 minutes, which felt like an eternity. The HOA tried to claim I was illegally occupying a reassigned house when the officers arrived. The officers requested their paperwork, but the HOA refused again. I approached and politely said, "Officers, this is my property. My name is on the deed and taxes." One officer told the HOA that if they didn't show a court-ordered eviction notice, they should leave and stop harassing me. HOA leaders glanced, deciding what to do. Finally, one gave the officer paper. I had to strain my eyes to see from afar, and I saw a typed letter with a heading like Community Reassignment Notice. It claimed that Conrad had been awarded the property due to special needs. The officer frowned and said, "This isn't worth the paper it's printed on. You know you can't evict someone with a letter from an association they're not in?" The HOA argued that they had authority granted by the community, which confused me and the officers. It was painfully obvious this was staged. They were told to leave or face trespassing charges by the officers. When they refused, the officers calmly but firmly removed them from my porch. I felt relieved watching them leave, but I was still angry about the whole situation. Forging fake papers to steal my property. Who were they? That night, I explained the whole ordeal to my lawyer, a friend of a friend. He said they harassed me and possibly committed fraud by presenting that letter as a legal document. For documentation and trespassing evidence, we filed a report. If they were bold enough to try that stunt once, they might try again. I installed a high-tech security system around the house with cameras at every angle, motion sensors, and a phone connection for alerts. I even posted several no trespassing signs in prominent locations. I could provide evidence for law enforcement and any judge who might hear about this if they kept pushing. Almost a week after the first ambush, my mother called me again after years. She left a voicemail saying, "I don't appreciate you getting the police involved." Her message was full of self-righteous indignation, as if I was a criminal for defending my property. She also said Conrad was deeply upset that I would go to such lengths, and that if I cared about him at all, I would hand over the deed. Not calling back and yelling at her took all my willpower. Instead, I blocked her number. My lawyer would handle all communication with them from then on. If they had something to say, they could write and prepare for court. But the madness continued. The HOA seemed determined to investigate every angle. A few days later, they sent me an environmental violations notice. It said my yard was overgrown or not in compliance. Let me clarify. I regularly pay for landscaping services to keep the area around the house in good shape, especially since it's mountainous and can get wild quickly. There was nothing unusual. Still, they threatened me with a huge fine if I didn't fix the violation. I suspected it was another intimidation tactic to get me to join the HOA or comply with their demands. I showed the notice to my attorney, who laughed and said, "We'll take care of it." He sent them a cease and desist letter explaining that they had no authority over me or my property, because I was never part of their association, and that any further harassment would result in legal action. Another subplot emerged. Conrad and my mother had begun telling extended relatives, who I rarely see, that I was refusing to help in a life-or-death situation. They accused me of hoarding a spare house and prioritizing property over family health. Several cousins chastised me. I was shocked when an aunt I hadn't spoken to in a decade accused me of elder abuse. It took a lot of restraint to keep my side of the story quiet amid endless rumors and emotional manipulation. I politely explained that they didn't know the whole story and that I was handling it legally. One cousin apologized after realizing the HOA's involvement was suspicious and that my claim of being legally forced to forfeit the house was false. As the weeks passed, I kept in touch with the local police station to document everything. I explained everything to a helpful officer with over 20 years of experience in that region. He had never heard of a HOA forcing a family member to take over a property. He said, "They're stepping so far outside the law that I'm amazed they're not backing down." That suggested the HOA was run by a group of incompetent or arrogant people who thought they could do whatever they wanted. Another thing happened. The HOA filed a complaint against me with the county clerk. I don't know what they were trying to accomplish, but they claimed that my deed was incorrect because the property belonged to my grandfather, then my father, and was never properly transferred. This was nonsense because I have all the inheritance paperwork. All was recorded by my lawyer. We quickly presented the clerk's office with the valid and recorded chain of title. This complaint strengthened our claim that the HOA was acting frivolously and vindictively. Though the clerk's office dismissed it quickly, it cost me time and money to resolve. Only a few close friends' unwavering support helped me through these stressful weeks. Marcus, a paralegal for years, offered to help me search for relevant property statutes. Marcus found a solution while brainstorming. Since the HOA had no legal authority over me, their repeated attempts to present fraudulent paperwork and interfere with my property rights could lead to a civil suit for damages. I wasn't sure I wanted to go that far. Lawsuits can take ages, but the more they harassed me, the more I thought they deserved a lasting lesson. So we could file a lawsuit if they tried another trick. We prepared the paperwork. I wasn't lying. If they pushed, I would push back harder. The final straw was driving up to my mountain house unannounced one weekend, confirming my suspicions. I kept my trip a secret. I arrived late Friday afternoon, hoping for a relaxing weekend. A large sign was staked into the ground near the entrance as I drove up the driveway. Property seized by the Community Homeowners Association was written in bold. Red tape surrounded part of my yard. They appeared to have tried to recreate a movie scene of condemned property. I was furious. I knew what to do this time. I used my phone to record the sign, taped area, and house outside, narrating the date and time. I marched to my porch and unlocked my door. Thankfully, nobody was inside. However, that sign alone was aggressive. They declared this theirs, even though it was mine. I left the sign up for police to see. I immediately called the same officer and was advised to come down to the station to file a formal complaint for trespassing and vandalism, since they placed that sign and tape without permission. I called my lawyer, who said, "This is great evidence. We have them blatantly asserting ownership or control over your property with zero legal basis." I filed the complaint, gave my attorney a copy, and prepared the formal lawsuit for harassment, trespassing, and fraudulent misrepresentation that weekend. My lawsuit was served on the HOA Monday morning. All board members named in the complaint were shocked. I guess they never thought I'd follow through. Some said they never meant for things to go so far. One said, "This is just a misunderstanding." Another blamed Conrad, saying he had told them I had verbally agreed to transfer the house. However, they faced a serious legal battle with potential damages in the tens of thousands of dollars for their repeated attempts to violate my property rights. My lawyer stated that we would not accept an apology. The consequences of their actions were due. I also stopped talking to Conrad and my mom. My lawyer wrote a firm response if they contacted. No more texts or voicemails. Family pressure increased as more relatives joined in, but I persisted. I was sick of being the scapegoat in their twisted morality. The truth was that you don't steal someone's property because you need it. Law and fairness don't work that way. Interestingly, local press reported the lawsuit. A small local paper in the region wrote about the bizarre case of a HOA trying to seize a non-member's home. I never spoke to them. They didn't name me or the stepfather, but they called the HOA an egregious example of overreach. I guess that publicity killed some board members' reputations. After that article, the HOA's new attorney called my lawyer to request an out-of-court settlement. He asked if we would drop the lawsuit if they paid damages and signed a binding agreement to never bother me again. My attorney and I discussed it. With them cornered, we demanded more than a token sum. We wanted a large sum to cover my legal fees and a little extra as punishment. Their attorney initially objected, but the HOA realized they would lose big if they went to court. Video recordings, police reports, that fake sign, and the typed reassignment notice were too much to overcome. We settled. They offered me a 5-figure sum to cover my expenses and give me something extra. They also signed a document acknowledging that I was the sole owner of the house, that they would never place liens or other claims against it, and that they would only communicate with me through counsel if a dispute arose. Though it didn't erase their stress, it was a sweet victory. I could relax without looking over my shoulder every time I went to my front door. After this, what happened to Conrad and my mother? I've heard from relatives that they're still upset about not getting the house. My mother told others that things got out of control with the HOA, as if she hadn't planned it by going to them. Conrad now calls me horrible and apathetic, but I've accepted it. If defending my property makes me the villain, so be it. My conscience is clear. No promises, no illusions. I own the house and will keep it. You may be wondering if the fiasco is over. I haven't heard from the HOA since the settlement. Several board members resigned in disgrace after the lawsuit. It was likely a major setback for the association, and the rest must have realized their precarious position. I would sue them again if they meddled with me. If nothing drastic changes, I won't talk to my estranged mother and stepfather. When they tried to bully me out of my property with an entire organization, they crossed a line. Due to how dramatic this was, I sometimes wondered if I had done the right thing by fighting back so hard. Perhaps I should have donated more. I remember that giving them the house wouldn't have solved the deeper issues. It would have promoted the idea that family needs justify bulldozing people's boundaries, which is wrong. I believe everyone has the right to protect their property and fight bullies, whether they wear suits to HOA board meetings or call themselves family. You might think the settlement ended the debacle and parted ways. This is mostly true, but there were some unanticipated ripple effects afterward, weaving in a couple of smaller subplots. My mountain community neighbor Ray, an older man, contacted me 2 months after the settlement. We were casual acquaintances. Sometimes I helped him shovel his driveway and he brought vegetables from his garden. He told me he had gotten into trouble with the HOA over his mailbox post color. He was interested in my background. After I explained the entire process and how we settled, Ray started telling me about how the HOA had historically targeted unpopular residents. He saw a pattern. They found or invented a violation, threatened fines or legal action, and scared people into compliance or selling their homes. They went too far in my case, but it may have been a pattern of intimidation. Ray advised me to share the story with more locals, not for revenge, but to inspire neighbors to speak up. I quietly met a few residents, heard their complaints, and gave them my attorney's number. A small group formed a neighborhood watchdog group to ensure HOA compliance with state laws. They didn't want to disband it because some HOA aspects might be beneficial, but they wanted a new board and oversight. My story sparked it. Ironically, I was never a HOA member, but my case started a mini revolution to prevent other residents from being bullied. Transparency and fairness-minded board members are expected to replace the old guard in the upcoming election. That's a bright side to a difficult situation. An old friend contacted me, causing another ripple. My childhood friend recognized the local paper story and connected the dots. Call her Kelly. She remembered how much I loved that mountain house as a kid. She said, "I'm so sorry this happened to you, but I'm really proud of you for standing your ground." We talked for hours about old times and the fiasco, which ironically led to a renewed friendship. It was nice to have someone outside the fray who understood how important that house was to me and how personal this matter had become. We even planned to meet at the mountain house with friends after the dust settled. If the HOA thought they could stop me from enjoying my home, they were wrong. Another interesting twist. All this legal drama made me decide to finalize my estate planning. I'm single, but I put the mountain house in a trust, so there wouldn't be any doubt about who inherits or controls it if I died. My father gave it to me and I wanted to make sure nobody stole it. It may be overly cautious, but after what I went through, it was worth it. The house is legally in a trust with a close friend as the successor trustee. Thus, if Conrad, my mother, or any other entitled relative claims they have a right to it in the future, they will face the same legal hurdle. It's off limits. I remember the ordeal as a roller coaster that tested my patience, finances, and family loyalty. I learned vital lessons. First, never take property rights for granted. Have all your paperwork and be ready to defend it. Second, family strife doesn't justify immoral or illegal behavior to get what they want. Third, some HOAs are helpful, but the wrong people can take them too far. Most importantly, I learned you can resist intimidation. In the right, stand firm. The law may move slowly, but it supports documented ownership rights clearly. Despite the lies, a valid deed and official records are worth more than fake community reassignment letters. I find the whole situation surreal, but seeing the HOA board members' faces when they realized they had no legal standing was poetic justice. When I feel powerless in bureaucracy, I'll remember watching the police escort them off my porch. Watching them scramble to settle the lawsuit was the cherry on top. They wanted to rule the neighborhood, but they had to obey the law. Conrad and my mother should learn that they can't force someone, family or not, to give up what's theirs. Perhaps their attempt to use the HOA for dirty work taught them about boundaries, but I'm not expecting a sincere apology. And as for me, I'm content. I still have my home in the city and I still have my beloved mountain house. Now, every time I go up there, I feel a deeper appreciation for that place. I think of my father and how proud he'd be that I stood up for myself. Sometimes I sit on the porch, looking out over the pines and valleys, and I reflect on the entire saga. It was stressful and infuriating, but it was also a defining moment. I discovered a backbone I didn't know I had, and I found new allies in the process. In a way, the ordeal reaffirmed my attachment to that house. It's not just a piece of real estate, it's a family legacy and a personal sanctuary. No one's going to take that away from me. Life has pretty much returned to normal now, though I keep my cameras and security systems in place. You never know when someone might try something stupid again, but the HOA has been eerily quiet since they cut that settlement check and signed the agreement. That's how I like it. Peace and quiet. A new board election is coming up, and I suspect half of the old board members who resigned won't even show their faces. The few that remain are bound by a legal vow never to contact me directly. I'm not sure what kind of changes the new board will bring, but if they're wise, they'll steer clear of messing with me or any other property owners who aren't official HOA members. Word travels fast in this community now that the cat's out of the bag. I still get the occasional message from distant relatives urging me to reconcile with my family, but I ignore them. Sometimes you have to preserve your well-being by keeping certain people out of your life. This fiasco reminded me that allowing toxic influences to linger can lead to chaos. Conrad and my mother's audacity to try to forcibly claim the mountain house was the final straw for me. I'm sure they have their own narrative about how I turned cold and selfish, but I sleep well knowing the truth. I've done nothing except protect the property that was passed down to me. Even though it's been a bruising, crazy journey, I can finally say, I won. I kept my house, exposed the HOA for the frauds they were, and reminded certain relatives that they can't just guilt trip or bully me into submission. In many ways, it feels like I drew a firm boundary line in my life. It's a boundary that says, you can't treat me like a doormat. And for someone like me, who used to be a people pleaser and hated confrontation, that's a huge breakthrough. I guess you could say it took an army of meddling neighbors and an overbearing stepfather to bring out my inner fighter. At the end of the day, the moral of this story might be that it's never too late to stand up for yourself. Sometimes you'll find yourself in a situation so outrageous that you have no choice but to fight back. And when you do, you might be surprised how strong you are. The law is often slow, but it's still the law. Bullies thrive on the assumption that most people won't push back, but push back enough, and you'll eventually topple the bully. So here I am, settled, content, and free of that oppressive sense that someone might show up on my porch with a bogus eviction notice. My house remains my house. My family remains at a distance. The HOA remains in disarray, paying off the settlement they foolishly brought upon themselves. As far as I'm concerned, everything turned out as it should have. If anyone reading this is dealing with a similar situation, whether it's an overreaching HOA, an entitled family member, or any combination thereof, I can only encourage you. Stand firm. Know your rights. Document everything. Get a good attorney if you can. And don't ever sign anything without reading it thoroughly. or let anyone wave a document in your face that you can't see. The minute they refuse to show it, it's a gigantic red flag. Now life goes on. I've put the entire ordeal behind me, but I felt it was worth telling this story so that others might learn from my experiences. For a little while, that house felt tainted by stress and conflict. But now it's back to being the peaceful mountain retreat I always loved. The porch is freshly painted, the new windows are installed, and the yard is well maintained. My security cameras stand guard, a silent testament to the lessons learned. I often walk the property line, rereading the no trespassing signs, feeling a renewed sense of ownership and pride. It might sound silly, but reclaiming my space physically helped me reclaim it emotionally. No one is going to run me off land that's rightfully mine. I'm planning a gathering with friends next month as a mini celebration. Nothing too wild, just a small barbecue in the backyard, some music, maybe a bonfire once the sun goes down, telling stories under the stars. The atmosphere up there is perfect for that sort of get-together, and it'll be a stark contrast to the tension of having uninvited board members lurking on my deck. Part of me wants to stand on the porch and announce, "Look around, this is my home and no one can take it from me." But I figure that might be overly dramatic. Still, I'll savor the moment, because I earned it. I guess this is where the story ends, at least for now. I hope you found it interesting, maybe even a little empowering. If there's one final takeaway, it's that property rights are no joke, and there are laws in place to protect you when someone tries to strong-arm you or produce fake legal documents. And if you're dealing with an HOA that oversteps, just remember, they might act like they have all the power, but they don't. The real law and official public records trump any made-up reassignment letter. Standing up for yourself might be scary at first, but as I learned the hard way, the cost of letting them walk all over you is even greater. In the end, truth and justice won out, and I get to keep my cherished mountain home exactly where it belongs, under my control, for my future, and for my peace of mind. Friends, thank you. See you soon.